nursing home, long-term care facilities, and injured loved ones. Hi, I'm Joel. This is Mark. Welcome back to the Williams, ELLEBY HOWARD EASTER YouTube channel. Today, that's what we're going to be talking about, and we're going to start by talking about why it matters as to the kind of facility that your loved one may be in, and what different laws may apply to those facilities. So Mark, you want to get us started with that?
Sure. So one of the first things anyone should know about a nursing home is that there are actually different levels of nursing homes. It could be an assisted living center. It could be what's called a skilled nursing facility. In Georgia, there are different layers of these, and one is called a personal care home. And the level of regulation that the federal government or the state puts on these different facilities depends on the level of care that needs to be provided.
Right. And when you're looking at the laws that apply and what regulations each facility has to adhere to, you have federal regulations, you also have state regulations, and those state regulations may vary according to what state you're in. So it's really important to know, depending on what kind of case you have or what happened to your loved one, what the laws are for your particular state, which means, as we always say, find a good lawyer that's experienced nursing home cases in your state so you'll be a step ahead of the game when you get started. One thing that I think is really important in any kind of assisted living case is being able to identify who the correct defendant is. In other words, who is responsible for the thing that happened to your loved one. And not just who did it, but who is legally responsible for paying damages according to what happened. So in nursing home cases or even assisted living facilities, it can be just a nightmare trying to figure out exactly who the corporate defendant is. But there are certain ways that you can go about figuring out exactly who is responsible. And I think one of the first places you would look would be the contract you signed with the nursing home or the assisted living facility to see who the corporate entities are and who employs the people that did something or failed to do something to hurt their patient.
That's exactly right. And one of the first things someone should look at is the contract, because when you go into a nursing home or any personal care home, assisted living, you sign a contract and it should have the corporate name at the bottom. Another way of doing that is I like to send, in Georgia it's called an Open Records Act request, it could be called a Freedom of Information Act request to the state, and ask for information about the facility located at such and such an address. And typically it will come back and it might give you filing paperwork that the corporation did with the state that then shows you what the corporate entity is. One other red flag that you got to be concerned about is if medical care is one of the issues, not just nursing care. Oftentimes medical directors of these facilities are outside doctors who have their own contract with the corporation. And so it may be that if the doctor did something wrong in doing a plan of care or not ordering correct medication or whatever, that you may be having to look to an entirely different entity.
That's right. And depending on what happens, it could be different. Like Mark was saying, it could be doctors, their physicians group, it could be nurses that are employed by the nursing home or assisted living facility. But when we're looking at these long-term care facilities and the things that can happen, the ways that patients could be harmed, it's as broad as the sea. You could have things like assaults, physical or sexual, bed sores, infections, falls, malnutrition, dehydration, wandering if somebody's got a mental defect and they're allowed to wander and are not properly supervised. You could have things like medication errors. All of these different things could happen, and there's different people within the facility that have the responsibility to monitor things and do things to prevent something bad like that from happening. So for example, if it's a medication error, there may be a doctor who issues the orders for a certain medication, but then someone else, either a med tech or sometimes nursing homes will have individuals whose only job is to administer medication, and they could mess that up, right? And so there's not really discretion there, which leads us to another topic, is when do you need an expert witness for a nursing home case?
Yeah, so Georgia has a rule that anytime you have a claim that's based on professional services that requires professional skill and care, it's considered to be a professional negligence or malpractice case. And in that type of situation, you have to have an expert, even in Georgia, to get in the courthouse door. You have to have an affidavit signed by an expert who says there was negligence, and they have to actually identify the caregiver or the type of caregiver that committed the negligence. That's not always the case. There are things that happen in a nursing home that might not involve professional care and skill, and it's called ordinary negligence, and you have to be able to know which is which.
Yeah, a good example of that might be the medication error that we were talking about earlier. So the doctor may have discretion as to what types of medication to prescribe, and the doctor may prescribe the exact right, correct medication that the patient needs, but then the person who's administering the medication may give patient A's medication to patient B, and then patient B is seriously harmed because they take the wrong medication. There's no discretion there. When the doctor says give medications A, B, C, and D, give it in this amount, give it 3 times a day at these times, then the person who's administering the medication has to follow the doctor's orders. So the doctor has the discretion, but the tech or the nurse is just following those orders. So arguably, I'm sure the defense may have a different opinion on this sometimes, but arguably there's no professional discretion there. You're just doing what you're told.
Sure. Another good example of that might be nutrition, because a doctor may say, make sure there's adequate nutrition intake, enough fluids for someone to be able to stay hydrated, but then the person who's serving the meal may place the food or the liquid in front of someone who's incapable of feeding themselves, and they may sit there and starve with food sitting right in front of them. That's not necessarily something that requires professional skill. It's simply a matter of making sure that they feed themselves.
Yep. So when you're dealing with a situation where a loved one or yourself is hurt badly in a nursing facility or a long-term care facility, one of the biggest challenges that we run into are what we call arbitration clauses. And arbitration clauses are written into contracts when you get ready to admit someone to the facility that basically waives your right to a jury trial. And instead of going to a court of law and hashing out the dispute about who's at fault, you would go to an arbitration where there may be a panel of 3 arbitrators or 1 arbitrator, depending on how it's written up. And then the case is essentially tried in this alternate forum as opposed to the courthouse. Now, generally, the nursing homes are going to want to do arbitration because they will say, we're going to use this company to do the arbitration, and instead of going to court and having a jury trial. There's many reasons they want to do that, but it is a challenge in these cases as to figuring out whether that arbitration clause that's written into the contract is even enforceable. So there's several things that we would look at to determine whether they're enforceable or not. You want to go over a couple of those?
Sure. Like one of the big ones is the person who signed the contract, did they have the right to sign an arbitration clause? Because sometimes a person who's entering a nursing home may have a loved one or somebody else sign the contract for them, and that person may or may not have a power of attorney on behalf of that person to sign the contract. Another thing is whether the contract was presented in such a way that it was fair. Was it tiny print that no one could read? Were there sufficient language in there to let people know what they were signing? Did a person have mental capacity to sign a contract? Those are all things that you look at to find out whether the clause can be enforced.
Yep. So all in all, when someone is injured in a long-term care facility, no matter what the injury is, some of the most important things that you're going to need to look at are what type of facility it is, so you can figure out which regulations apply. You're going to need to figure out who the individuals and corporate entities are that could potentially be responsible for the damage. You're going to need to figure out, okay, how was the person hurt, and how do we link it up and say, they were hurt due to what error and what breach of the standard of care or what ordinary negligence led to those injuries. And then you have to figure out what forum to bring the claim in. Is it going to be arbitration? Is it going to be a traditional lawsuit? But there are a lot of things and subspecialties that have formed in the law dealing with nursing home and long-term care facility cases. So when you have the unfortunate situation where you or a loved one is hurt in one of these facilities, then it's going to be really important to find a lawyer with experience handling those type cases, because the rules are not the same as they are in a regular car wreck case or a slip and fall case.
Correct. If a lawyer takes a nursing home case and doesn't even know the regulations that might apply to that home, then they're going to be missing a whole lot of potential avenues to pursue the case.
That's right. All right. Well, anything else you can think of on nursing home cases?
No, the only thing I can think of is if you're thinking of sending someone, a loved one, to a nursing home, is make sure you read the contract. You don't have to sign that arbitration clause. And make sure you do some research on Medicare's website to see if there's been problems in the past.
Yep. All right. Well, we hope this video has been helpful to you. If so, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and we will see you next week.